We're going to check the condition and the gap on these spark plugs. We'll remove the coil pack or the spark plug wire so we can take out the coil pack. Break loose the spark plug. Take it out the rest of the way. We'll check the condition on these spark plugs. And wow, that does not look very good at all. 0.035 is pretty typical for spark plugs. And I mean, obviously, even just looking at this, I can see the huge difference. This is almost 3 times the size that the gap is supposed to be. This is a Bosch Platinum, and really what we're gonna do next is clean this up on the wire wheel, get this to the correct gap, and we'll test it in the car, see if it runs any smoother. The wire wheel does a great job cleaning this up, and now after I'm looking at it, it doesn't look quite as bad. I mean, the gap is still really, really bad, but this electrode I kind of thought was shorter, tapered off, and worn down, but it looks like it just needs regapped to the correct size. Using a feeler gauge and a hammer, this hammer has some soft tips. A steel hammer would also work. This is just gonna not ding it up quite as much. We're gonna straighten it up. If you're gonna put it in the vise, make sure it's bolting onto the hex pattern, onto the metal, not onto the ceramic, because that'll just break. With a pick, we're gonna clean everything out, make sure it's clean down in the electrode. When you're done working on it, just blow it out really good with an air compressor with your mouth. We don't want any pieces of dust still in there that can fall into the cylinder. You can see the difference between one that's been cleaned up and one that hasn't. This one's been gapped correctly, this one hasn't. The Platinum is a very thin wire in the spark plug, and this one's actually recessed down in there like the Platinum has slowly gotten used up. These plugs have a lot of miles on them, so I'm assuming that the Platinum has been used up, and that's why it's starting to recess down in there. Plug number 3 isn't quite as worn out on that electrode, the Platinum electrode. It's right there at the surface, it's not recessed. To test the spark plugs, we're going to get an ohm reading. It's just as simple as taking both probes, putting one on the top, one on the bottom electrode, and right there it's 3.9 ohms. You're going to go through and do this to each one of the spark plugs, and if one of them is significantly different from the rest, then that's something you need to look into. All of ours were right around 4, so that's what we're looking for, that's good. There's a resistor on these spark plugs, unlike a lawnmower or a chainsaw spark plug where there's no resistor. We put a wire on the end of this one so we can get into the plugs that have a recessed electrode, and then we were able to test it that way. And whenever you're testing it, you don't want to be touching the electrodes or the metal, or else it'll throw off your reading. The plugs will give a different reading whenever they're warm, so make sure they're all the same temperature. On ohms, we'll check for any cracks in the insulation by measuring from the threads to the tip, and you shouldn't see any reading at all. We just finished testing everything now, so we have a good ohms reading, there's no cracks in the insulation, and they're all gapped to the correct gap. We can go ahead and put these back in the car now. When you put in the spark plugs, you always put them in by hand because these are threads you really don't want to strip out. Now we'll torque these to 15 foot-pounds. And you still want to be careful whenever you're torquing it. Feel the threads, don't blindly torque it. Make sure it feels right. That felt good. It'd be a good idea to check the manufacturer's specs for your car because it could be different. I do like this electronic torque wrench from Harbor Freight. I like feeling and hearing how close it is to the torque because with the click type, you don't know how close you are to it. So if you're tightening down a bolt, and you feel it might be beginning to give or you don't want to go much tighter, this will tell you if you're close to it or not. With a click type, you don't really know. Clip on the coil packs, and we'll tighten up the coil packs. So now we'll start it up. Sounds a lot better. It definitely drives a lot better. It can take a load much easier. And none of the fault codes have returned, which is a good sign. Before, this had a multiple misfire and then another cylinder with the misfire, like a cylinder 3 misfire. And now after cleaning and gapping those spark plugs, it's much better. Before, it would not take a load. It wouldn't even go up a small hill. Now it's really not a problem. It goes up a lot smoother and I'm not feeling any misfires in the engine.